Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar. Really excited to have some Michigan schools joining us today to talk all about esports. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things for everyone here. The Q&A and the chat function are both live. So if at any point today there's things that you have questions about or want to comment on, we definitely want you to be able to do that. So make sure you drop that in. I'll be kind of keeping track of everything on my end, and we'll definitely answer those questions. For those of you that are joining us live, again, thanks so much for taking some time out of your Thursday to be with us here. For those watching on the YouTube channel, thanks so much for watching the replay. For you guys, questions that you would like answered, drop them in the comment section below and keep an eye on that. That's kind of how we can interact with you guys post live session. So no matter where you're coming from, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. And I'm going to share my screen. We'll get into things here. Moments. I want to do screen 2. All right. So again, everyone, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. This is a webinar all about Michigan esports. And we want to, before we dive too far, much deeper in, give a big shout out to our main sponsor here, Intel. They've been huge in promoting and helping esports grow across the country and definitely in Michigan too. So we just want to recognize them for all the great work and partnership that they give ByteSpeed and the schools in the Michigan state. So real quick, your hosts for today. My name is Josh Knutson. For those of you who don't know me, I am the Esports and VR Solutions Director here at ByteSpeed. I've been with the company for just about 4 years. In a previous life, I was a collegiate esports coach at the University of Jamestown. Out in North Dakota. I did that from 2016 to 2019, and then actually was a ByteSpeed customer and joined the team here in Moorhead in the spring of 2019. The other kind of cool thing about my background is I'm an advisory board member for NACAD. That's the National Association of Esports Coaches and Directors. It's a great organization that's really pushing the professional development side of esports coaching, both at the high school and the college level. And they have online sessions and great networking events throughout the year and in different parts of the country. And we definitely recommend looking into them, especially if you're new to the esports world. My contact info is on the screen. Please feel free to get a hold of me after the webinar. Shoot me a text, give me a call, connect with me on social media, whatever works best for you. If we don't answer your questions, we want to make sure that we can do that and follow up with you afterwards. I am thrilled to be joined here by Chris Bilski from Michigan State, and I'm going to hand the floor over to him to kind of let him introduce himself. And Chris, you're muted.
Oh, yeah. I appreciate it, Josh. As he had said, my name is Chris Bilski. I am the director of esports at Michigan State University. Hopefully, if this is aimed at Michigan schools, hopefully you're familiar with Michigan State, but like Josh as well, part of the NACAD advisory board. Highly recommend if you're a school that's trying to figure out and navigate how to get into esports, taking a look at NACAD. They have some really great materials, both for new and existing programs out there. My contact info is on the screen below as well. There's my email. I'm on both Twitter and Instagram at Coach Bilski, and then you can follow our team. We're just launching our team, our official competitive team this fall. So there's not very much content on there yet, but I encourage you to follow because we've got some exciting things coming down the line.
Thanks so much for being here with us this afternoon, Chris. I think it's super important to have some representation from Michigan actually talking about what's going on. And we're really excited about what's going to happen at Michigan State with esports and some of the great things that we'll touch on later that you guys have already been up to. So really appreciate you taking some time this afternoon to join us and be a expert with us on the panel. So I think kind of the format for today and kind of how we're going to split things up, we're going to talk just real briefly about how you build a space like this. It is a great showcase of what an esports facility used to look like, 6 years ago. This is a picture from the facility that I built at University of Jamestown. So I got to brag a little bit about the room that we put together. But I think everybody has this kind of very stereotypical idea of what a facility looks like or what a program looks like. from the esports side of the house. And today we want to kind of walk through some of the key questions that you might come across or ask yourself in getting your own programs off the ground. Because there's a lot that has to happen between going from a blank room to a facility that's built out like this. So we want to address a lot of those key questions, talk about some of the opportunities in the state of Michigan on the competitive side, on the academic side, and really just kind of answer a lot of the key FAQs that pop up when we talk about esports. So to get started, and before we even talk about the equipment that you need or some of the opportunities out there, I think it's really important to talk about why schools are adding esports in the first place. And this is kind of where I would love to hear from you, Chris, about kind of some of the key takeaways that you've seen as we kind of move into this next slide for driving factors. But can you talk a little bit about what you've seen across the state and some of the experiences that you've had, some of the big reasons why schools adopt esports in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll start this off with that. I think there are usually different reasons between why colleges and high schools start esports programs. So that's an important distinction to kind of set the basis with. But there's just a few primary reasons that we've kind of found over the last few years of why esports, right? Why are schools starting esports programs? Why is this important? And I think really from the beginning, the most popular reason, even still today, has been enrollment, right? Like at the collegiate level, colleges and universities see esports as a new way to attract students to their campuses, right? And so, especially with a lot of smaller schools, and we know in Michigan that number of students that we have in the state is going down. We've seen a decrease in a lot of different schools and colleges across the state. So esports can be a new way to connect with students, to engage students, to attract students to your campus. Now, while that's a very popular reason for schools adding esports, that's not the only reason, right? Especially once you get into these larger schools like myself, Grand Valley, other schools of that size, we switch away a little bit from the enrollment aspects of it to more of that engagement, retention side of it, right? Providing opportunities for students to engage with Michigan State University in a way that they never had before. I've seen statistics that say that 82% of students in an esports club don't do any other extracurriculars, right? And what that to me means is that through esports, we can connect with those students in a way that we never have. And we can engage with the population that's really been isolated up until this point. And so, yes, reasons for why your esports program on your campus can vary, but more often than not, they're either tied to recruitment or retention of your students.
And I think it's definitely a cool thing to see. You talk about the students that haven't had those opportunities before. This is probably the biggest driving factor at the K-12 level of just opening up opportunities for students and having that kind of another touch point for those kids who might not have a big social group or might not have some kind of an activity that pulls them in and gives them ownership of their education. I know a lot of school districts, no matter if you're talking middle school, high school, a lot of those kind of institutions, are really gravitating towards being able to just give these kids an opportunity that they might not have had before, and introducing them to aspects of team building and critical thinking skills and things that we see in traditional sports, for the last 50 to 100 years. Those are things that are happening in these esports programs as well, and it's really a cool opportunity to teach life skills. And also give them a competitive outlet that they might not have had before. And then just kind of a really quick note before we move on is I think when you're looking, for those of you that are in attendance today or watching the recording, if you're thinking about building out your own program, one of the key things that I think is really important is to have kind of a driving mission statement or a defined goal for why you're building that program. If it's recruitment and pulling new school or new students into the district or into your college environment, that's great. If that's your guiding goal and the way that you want to operate things, that's awesome. Have that as kind of your main reason for why. If it is that student engagement piece and opening up opportunities and building social groups in the school, that's awesome too. I think a really cool thing about esports is there's not really a cookie cutter way of doing things. Every school is different. Every body of students is different. The needs that you're going to have are going to be different. So your program can really be built to reflect the things that you need most out of that esports program. And having that guiding principle or that goal to move towards is really important in the long-term success of your program. I think there's a lot of schools that just kind of jump into esports to keep up with the Joneses. You might feel pressure from other schools in your conference or in the state that have a program set up. And you're like, oh my gosh, we have to start this or we're going to fall behind. I think those are the schools and the teams that see success early on because they do adopt it and they have a bunch of people showing up right away. But if there's not like a key reason to why you're showing up every day, when you get 6 months down the line, your average number of students that are participating starts to go down, and it's not as successful of an implementation as you might think. So if there's one key kind of clear takeaway is have that guiding principle no matter what it is, and really stick to it and build your program around what your students need. The best or the kind of the next common question is, where do we put esports? I think space is a premium. And when you talk about where in a school that you're going to, stick a lab, I think a lot of question marks start to come up because a lot of our friends in the K-12 space have maybe gone away from traditional computer labs. Your one-to-one programs have really limited the number of spaces on a campus or in a building that are set up to house, computers and build out like a space that is conducive to esports. So you might be looking at re-outfitting a lab or a classroom space, or maybe looking at a library. I have seen, I think esports put in every single kind of space possible. And that's, definitely a benefit, but it's also something that when you're evaluating spaces, you really want to look at what are the needs of that space. And obviously, there's kind of a big bulleted list on the screen here, but these are really key factors in trying to find where in the school or where in the district that you're going to put, your facility. Give your team a home to play in. The number one factor obviously is square footage. What's the capacity? How many students? How much equipment can we put in this room before we're at what we can handle? That's going to limit the number of students that can participate. It's going to limit the amount of equipment that you have, and it's definitely something that you want to look for not necessarily like a big open space, but when you're kind of evaluating where your facility or where your team is going to practice and play, you want to look at where gives me the most amount of opportunity. Accessibility is a big thing. Everybody on the webinar here is educators. You all live in the education space. So, it's not something that I need to harp super hard on. But the cool thing about esports is that you can have students that have had those, physical limitations that might not have been able to play traditional sports or do other activities in the school. They might be able to do esports. There's things like adaptive controllers and having wheelchair access to get into a room that give some students in the district a chance to, for the first time, maybe be on a competitive team. And not that competition is the only reason to have esports programs, but this opens the door to a lot of non-traditional student athletes, and it's something that you definitely want to pay attention to. A lot of the ADA compliance rules work really well with just kind of the layout of an esports space. So those are things to kind of keep in mind. On more of the nuts and bolts side of things, power and internet definitely are things that you want to involve your IT department right away to talk about those things. I think it's a key hallmark of a well thought out program is having stakeholders in the district or at the college all involved from day one, whether it's superintendents and athletic directors from kind of that top administrative role all the way into your IT department that has network administrators and help desk techs and people that are going to be involved with keeping that space up to date. So making sure that you can have a wired internet connection, enough circuits to where you're not going to blow power to half the school when you turn things on. Those are things to have, conversations early when you're looking at a space. And then finally, HVAC and lighting. These might kind of seem like no-brainers, but I can tell you from somebody that put an esports lab in a room that didn't have working heat in that first kind of year that we were in there, it was not super comfortable. PCs nowadays don't throw a ton of heat. They're pretty power efficient. But when you have, 20 machines in a room and 30 bodies walking around and the door is shut, you want to make sure that there is adequate, equipment in place to make sure that you're comfortable and to make sure that, the equipment long-term doesn't suffer. And kind of the last real key point that is really a cool opportunity is your esports space going to be multi-purpose? Are you going to be sharing that space with other departments on campus? Are you going to be, working with different teachers that do engineering or AutoCAD or Adobe Labs or graphic design stuff? These are all, departments and academic resources that work really well on high-end machines. And that's a way that we've definitely seen schools at all levels kind of help split the cost of putting in esports into their school by sharing that burden with multiple departments. And then, you want to make sure that those students and those teachers and those professors that have access to that room, their needs are also being met and not just the esports team. Chris, I'm interested, you're on, you're not, this isn't your first rodeo building out a space. So maybe you can kind of talk about some of the different things that you've done in the past about facilities that you've built or places that you've looked at that are really serve as home, and just kind of talk about some of the things that you've seen.
Yeah, I think a few key points that I want to highlight here. HVAC, definitely something to think about sooner rather than later. At one of my prior institutions, I arrived after the space had been built, and we quickly found that, like you said, when there were 24 students and 24 running machines in this room that really wasn't meant for that, it got pretty hot in the room, and we had to reinstall and completely change up the HVAC. So definitely something from personal experience I recommend taking a look at when you're planning out this space. For me, like something that I try to highlight in our spaces, and you would find this in what we're building at Michigan State right now, is that I look for balanced spaces. And that I personally am not a huge fan of the idea of a space that's just a row of computers, row upon row. I look for spaces where students can connect adjacent to those gaming spaces, right? It's amazing the power of a couch and a television, or a table for students to do homework around together, right, in your space. Like, I have firsthand experience, placing those type of things in my gaming spaces. Those become some of the most well-utilized spaces, right? Because students, maybe even when they're not necessarily looking to game, will just come down to those spaces to hang out, right? Because they feel comfortable in that gaming space, or, it's an opportunity for them to make new friends, meet new people, find others who share the same passions and interests that they do. So I highly recommend, if you have the space and if you have the budget for it, create some adjacent spaces, create some spaces for students to connect that aren't necessarily just more computers. And I think the last thing, will this be a multi-purpose room? If you're finding difficulties and getting that final push and saying that approval for an esports space for you, having a space that can be used during the day for one thing and then be used at night for your esports program, I think is a really big selling point in a lot of these spaces, right? If it's something that, like you said, could be used for our computer science class during the day, or engineering, whatever it might be, right? If you can find something that can be multi-purpose, your chances of getting that space approved just skyrocket. And so I just want to highlight the idea of that. If you're struggling to get approval for a space, you're getting pushback, you just can't seem to get that final signature, I highly recommend maybe remodeling or redesigning your space a little bit, that it serves a purpose both during school and after school.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next kind of big question here is, what equipment do we need? This is the big question, right? The big head scratcher. And I think, it's important to kind of balance out a needs versus wants conversation, right? So I like the analogy of like, a Ferrari is really cool, but is a Toyota Camry going to get me from A to B safely, consistently, and budget consciously for a really long time? Yes, absolutely. So, there's definitely a balance to strike. But there's cool ways that you can reuse existing stuff in the school, or kind of supplement what you're looking to add in kind of rolling out esports. And there's definitely kind of priorities for equipment. We'll kind of run through each one and kind of just briefly talk about some of the averages or what we've seen from across the state and across the country. The first thing is definitely infrastructure, and a big disclaimer here. I am by no means a network administrator. I'm not a network tech, and I would assume that Chris, your background's not in internet. So this is going to be a very like layman's term example here. But we have to remember that this is a digital sport. We are working in a space where internet access is key to everything. And I think, there are a couple of things that you need to look at when adding esports for whatever reason it might be, whether it's competitive, academic driven, you name it. You need to look at what does your connection look like? I think it's an intimidating thing to talk about because I think a lot of schools are like, oh my gosh, we're adding gaming to the network. Like, we're not going to be able to support that. Our connection speed is not great, or we have issues here or there. I think the important thing to remember is that for the K-12 side of things, especially, you don't have 500 Chromebooks walking around the school at 4:00 in the afternoon when esports practice might be, or a lot of the devices that are pinging your network consistently throughout the day and are chewing up a lot of that bandwidth are not typically turned on and doing that during esports games, practices, you name it. So the existing infrastructure that a lot of schools have is definitely sufficient to get started. Now, it might be something that you want to, expand upon in year 2 or year 3 after you've kind of walked through and seen how things perform. I'll give you guys an example. When I started at Jamestown, we started our facility on a separate network from the rest of campus. That's pretty common, no matter what level you're talking about, creating a VLAN or a separate, network altogether to kind of get the network traffic away from the rest of what school is doing or the rest of campus is doing. So that, your permissions and your performance are where you need them to be. And we had a 500 meg connection for 15 computers when we got started. So not crazy by any stretch of the imagination. And for that first year, it worked for us. When we expanded into a little bit larger of a facility, we added more devices, more players, more practice time. We found that it was, definitely something that we needed to increase our bandwidth. So we went from that 500 meg connection to a gig for that room, and that really helped out with the larger facility that we ended up having. But it wasn't something that we did from day one. We tried with what we had originally, and it really worked well for that first year. Some of the key considerations, though, that you'll need to have, regardless of what your network looks like, you're going to need to have your administrators take a look at your firewall. Chances are most schools, most colleges have, League of Legends or the Blizzard launcher or some of the Steam. Chances are those are blocked by your firewall. And you're not going to have, just any computer in the district have access to launching those games and having access to the internet in a way that, they can download stuff to the machines and things like that. So you're going to have to come up with a strategy and a plan on how you're going to manage that. There is not a right or a wrong way to do this. It really comes down to the comfort level of your network admins and kind of what they feel comfortable doing with the school. There have been cases where the network just gets opened up for 2 hours and it's kind of carte blanche access with it, like an administrator password. To where like the esports coach or whoever's running the program has to enter in those credentials for something to get downloaded or updated. And then there's, other kind of styles of management to where patches roll through in off hours, and it's not really an active thing for, your team to really keep track of, but the IT department is handling, updating those machines. So no matter what your strategy is, it's definitely something to have those conversations early to make sure that you have a plan in place. Updates are a thing in esports that we have to really have a strategy for. The game of football has really been the same for relatively, the last 30, 40, 50 years. Esports gets a new rule update every 2 weeks. There are patches that come through and updates that come through to the games that change the way it's played. And for you to actually even be able to launch the game, you have to download those patches and have to update the games. So having a plan in place for that is really important. And then lastly, do everything you can to have a wired internet connection and not play on Wi-Fi. It's going to be a more stable environment. Your students are going to have a better experience, not having to deal with kind of the finickiness of Wi-Fi. And it's, I think from a management standpoint and from a just kind of overall district perspective or college perspective, having that internet connection that's wired into the wall, wired into a switch for security and for access, it's really, really important and goes a long way to alleviating some of those headaches down the road. Chris, anything to add here on kind of the infrastructure side of things?
Yeah, I just want to reinforce the wired over Wi-Fi concept, right? That, I would not recommend trying to build it out over Wi-Fi as just an absolute last resort. We'll say that. And I just want to also say that you talked about having these conversations early. And I think that's really important, that people like your network people are excellent people to get involved as early as possible in this process. Because what you don't want to happen is to get to that end point and then not have network for your space, right? So get them involved as early as you can. It's going to save you a lot of headaches down the road.
Absolutely. Next up is devices. And this is kind of like the big question, right? Just how many do we need? What does it look like? What specs do I need? And this is kind of always changing, but here are some of the key kind of things to think about. As far as how many devices, depending on what level you're looking to implement esports into, whether it's middle school, high school, college, etc., you really want to look at a couple of things. Number one is, what titles are you playing, and what's the minimum you need to field a roster? This is a one-to-one activity as far as students to devices concerned on the PC side of things. Consoles get a little bit different, but traditionally it is one-to-one for when you're actually playing the games. So for games like Overwatch 2 and League of Legends and some of the more popular team titles, 5 devices is what you would need at the bare minimum to get started. Rocket League is kind of the oddity out there. It's the most popular esport in the K-12 world, and it's gaining, I think it's on the rise in college. It's always been popular in college, but I think we hear more about Rocket League now than we ever have before. But that is a 3-on-3 title traditionally. So if you're looking at the bare minimum, you would need 3 devices. What a lot of schools will do is they'll kind of take a look at that number of minimum and say, okay, let's double that to be able to have inter-practice scrimmages with like my A and B teams, or my high school team is going to play the JV team in practice, or we're going to have multiple game titles practicing at the same time. The average at the K-12 level is 10 to 15 machines to start. That's nationwide from what we've seen at ByteSpeed here. And then at the college level, Esports Foundry is a group that published a study. They do one every year, and they survey college teams from across the country, and facility size is part of that study. And out of the 95 schools that they took data from last year, the average facility size at the college level was 25 machines. So that gives you an idea of kind of what people start with. Now, certainly, there are schools that are on the opposite extremes of those. We've helped schools out in, rural areas of the country that are smaller districts that have, they're going to start with 3 machines and that's it. On the opposite side, University of Akron has 94 machines spread across 3 facilities. So there's kind of a very wide spectrum on the device side, but the averages for those that are looking to get started, 10 to 15 in high school and about 25 in college. And the good thing too, when we talk about specs and actually like getting into the nitty gritty of the machines, is that a lot of esports titles are optimized to play on, what we'd call entry-level hardware. And part of that is games like League of Legends have been around for 10 plus years. And they started on hardware that didn't have the capabilities that we do today. So some of the builds that we look at, to kind of get people started with ByteSpeed, on the entry level side of the house, it's things like an i5 with 16 gigs of RAM, SSD storage, an entry level graphics card, something like a 1660 Super, and then like your standard power supply and heatsink. Now, for anybody that's not technical out there, this is a very like entry level gaming desktop. It's very common to see this kind of spec in your like Project Lead the Way labs on the lower end, or like a home system for like if you've got a high schooler at home that likes to play PC games. This is a very common kind of like entry budget friendly setup. On the next kind of step up into the mid-level, you're going to go to that i7, still kind of have the same RAM and SSD requirements, but maybe look at increasing the video card to something like a 3000 series card, something current generation, moving into 4000 series for next year. And then having, that standard heatsink and maybe upping the power supply slightly. But these two builds are really good for the esports titles out there. It's not going to run your AAA big time single player games at max settings with ray tracing and some of the particle effects and things on. But these will do really, really well with academic applications that you're going to run in class time, and also, your esports titles that aren't necessarily throwing everything but the kitchen sink at the graphics cards. Before we move on to peripherals and things like that, I think it's really important to know that you can do this at a budget-friendly option, but there are things that, things like an upgraded video card or upgraded processor that will increase cost a little bit. But we'll kind of talk about how to fundraise and how to actually pay for some of this stuff, because it does add up, semi-quickly. On the peripheral side of things, definitely looking at displays. The gold standard for peripherals, especially on a monitor side, is 24 inches. And 144 hertz is kind of the gold standard for most esports titles. Now, there are some schools that are kind of upping that to 240 hertz monitors, trying to go, even deeper into the competitive world and maximize the frames per second that you can get out of your machines. But for a really long time and still moving forward, that 24-inch flat display, please don't pay for a curved monitor. It's not worth the extra $100 you're going to spend. It's a little overhyped, but that flat panel that's got 144 hertz refresh rate, that is what you want to look for. On the keyboards and mice side of things, mechanical keyboards and mice are kind of the standard for gaming. And for esports, you're going to have more responsiveness out of those devices. They're typically going to last longer. They're a little bit more customizable and programmable, which is cool for some game titles where you have, okay, I'm going to have different inputs on my mouse buttons, or different keystrokes will do different things in the game. Having those mechanical devices, it allows you to do a lot more of that customization. And then headsets, definitely something over the ear. Helps with noise canceling. You don't have to have like a true noise canceling headset, but something that goes over the ear to help with game audio, which is super important, and also to be able to hear your teammates in a voice call, whether it's in Discord or the in-game chat, or if you've got to run through like a Google call or a Teams call or something like that. Having a microphone and some over-the-ear headphones is really important. Chris, any kind of thoughts on equipment and kind of what you've seen or what you think is really important key takeaways for the folks that are joining us?
Yeah, one thing that I would say to keep in mind is that something that's becoming really popular, and I highly encourage every program to do it, is to actually stream your matches.
Mhm.
And so if you're planning on streaming your matches, you're going to need another computer to run that stream from. And that computer, you're likely going to want a higher quality computer to handle running the stream. And so even if you go kind of more of the entry level on your other computers, I'd highly recommend spending a little bit more on that streaming computer so that it's able to handle the programs it needs to.
Yeah, absolutely. Great takeaway. So, and you might be asking, for those of you here today, like, how do we pay for this? This sounds really expensive. You've covered a lot of stuff, but what do I need to prepare myself for? So if we're talking about an entry-level config, most popular config for high school, for your kind of just getting started with things, the number that I give schools is about $2,000 per setup. And that'll cover your tower, keyboard, mouse, monitor, headset, all the peripherals that you would need. And it's a nice kind of round number to help with budgeting. If you move to that mid-level config, or you look at a streaming rig like Chris was saying, maybe we add $500 to that to cover a couple of different upgrades that we would want to do. So that kind of gives you an idea of the range. $2,000 to $2,500. Those are usually kind of where you want to be when you're just kind of getting started. Now, obviously, you could go above that and add super high-end components to your machines. But when you're just kind of looking to get started, dip your toe in, I think it's really easy to go to a district and say, okay, I need $10,000. I can get 5 stations and we can get this thing off the ground. It's a lot easier of a conversation to have than a football coach going and saying, hey, we need to redo the turf on the field, and it's going to be a couple $100,000 to outfit our facility. So it might seem like a lot of money, but when compared to other sports in the district or other activities, a lot of times it ends up being a lot more affordable than some of those other things that are happening. But again, how do we pay for this? So a couple of different resources I want to pass on. Budgeting for esports can happen in a lot of different ways. There are some schools, some districts, some colleges that will just kind of use some department money to pay for esports, whether it comes out of student life, IT, underwater basket weaving, it doesn't matter. Athletics is also a spot where some schools will pull money from, but they're allocating budget year over year to sustain this program. And that definitely is the most consistent way to fund it. And definitely, when you're thinking long-term, that's where you want to be. In the beginning, that might not be an option for you. So a lot of schools will look to grant writing. I've got a link here on the screen. It's bytespeed.com/resources/funding. This is a page on our website that is totally dedicated to education grants that we've seen schools use for technology. There's about 60 or 70 links with kind of little descriptions for each grant that'll take you to their page. And just kind of be a good springboard to kind of say, okay, maybe we apply for some funding here, or maybe, we can pull in money from this kind of program to dual purpose and kind of get back to that multi-use case for those machines. The most common way that we see schools access grant funding is through Project Lead the Way or Carl Perkins grants. So that CTE style, STEM focused programs that require equipment that you're going to use during the day for curriculum, higher end machines, or kind of those good gaming style machines to help do some of the things that a PLTW pathway has, or some of the career explorations through Carl Perkins. Those machines work great for esports, great for gaming. So to be able to access that funding, help out the academic side of your school, but then also have that really cool competitive club style environment for your students to enjoy esports. That's a great way to help fund it. I've got fundraising on here as kind of like a supplement to department and grant writing as kind of like the main two. E-Team sponsors kind of just a really good crowd-funded program that a lot of sports teams use from around the country. It's kind of like if Chris and I are both on the same team, I'm going to go to 5 of my friends and relatives and ask them for $5, and Chris is going to do the same. And then, we all of a sudden have $50 from 10 different people. So it's definitely not going to fund your whole program, but it's a cool way to kind of supplement what you're doing with some of the bigger ticket items like department budget or some of those grants. It's a really good way to help pay for jerseys every year, or some of the kind of surprise costs that you might see. Maybe you're going to take your team to an event or have some travel money or something like that. Those are kind of things where e-team sponsor could be a really good way to do it. The bake sales and raffles is kind of in there as a joke, but also as like a really cool example. One of my favorite fundraising stories from a school that we've directly worked with, Sandoval High School down in Illinois. They're a small rural district in Southern Illinois. They did a really, really cool raffle fundraiser for their esports program. Marvin Lindsay is the head coach there. He's a computer science teacher in the middle school. And he had his 8th grade computer science class put together an arcade cabinet in class as like a class project. They got a Raspberry Pi, programmed it up, loaded it on some old arcade games, and had things running on an emulator. And they built this really cool arcade cabinet as a class project during school as part of their homework, and then raffled off raffle tickets for that arcade cabinet to people in the community, and they made like $5,000 off of selling raffle tickets for that arcade cabinet. So again, it's not going to pay for your whole program, but it is kind of a cool supplemental thing. Don't discount those smaller extras that you can look for in doing your fundraising. The last thing on here, sponsorships and partnerships. This is something that really comes up a lot in the esports world. And my biggest advice for you, and I'd love to have Chris kind of talk about this too, is, start local with people that you're going to ask for those sponsorships. Some of your best advocates and some of your best resources are going to be your booster clubs that are already helping the school financially, and local businesses that support what's happening in the community. If you go to Chris's Plumbing and say, hey Chris, I would love for you to do a small donation to help us buy keyboards for the team this year, and then you go to Josh's hardware store and say, hey, would you consider donating that $2,000 to do one station? And then I'm going to make the same ask to the grocery store in town, to the VFW, the list goes on and on and on. But getting those local businesses, those people that are already invested in your students, in your school, in the community, getting them involved at smaller levels instead of going and saying, hey, Chris, I know you're a local person. Would you like to give us $50,000 so that we could do this esports lab? Probably going to get turned down for those kind of asks. Whereas I think the local businesses and booster clubs are really looking to help in kind of those smaller chunks. And you can kind of pool together a lot of different people in the community to help fund an esports program. But Chris, would you be able to talk a little bit about kind of that sponsorship style stuff and some of the things that you've seen work in the past?
Yeah, I think you nailed one of the biggest points of what I always say is, yes, the local aspect is really important, right? People need to feel connected to your program, and starting with local businesses is really the best way to do that. I think also when you're making pitches to different companies in your area, have it to be something tangible, right? If you're looking to raise money for your program, don't just say, hey, I'm just looking to raise money. Give them something specifically that you're looking to raise money for, right? I'm looking to raise money to take our students to this high school championship event, right? I'm looking to raise money to get new keyboards for our esports space, right? Make it something tangible rather than I just need cash, right? Because people are much more likely to contribute when they know specifically what that money is going for, right? And I also think that, it's important to understand that, when people are giving to your program, it's good to give back. And what I mean by that is find ways to reward those people who help out your program, whether that's they're invited to a special thank you dinner, or they get an opportunity to come one night and play with the team, or you get your logo or their logo on your jersey somewhere. The nice thing about esports is that in a lot of ways you have more flexibility for a lot of the things that you're doing than maybe the football team does, right? Whereas the football team may not be able to put Josh's Pizza on, their shoulder of their jersey. If the esports team isn't under athletics, you might be able to actually put Josh's Pizza on your shoulder of your jersey, right? So utilize that flexibility that you have to find creative ways to engage companies and businesses in ways that other clubs or other sports at your school might not be able to. And I think lastly is, when it comes to sponsorships and fundraising, understand your value, right? Like understand, like, what is it about your program that makes it special? What are you doing for students, right? This year we had this many students participate in our program that hadn't done any other extracurriculars at our school, right? So we're able to find things for students that they haven't had before. Or if you're looking for a local coding company, right? They do coding classes on the weekends or summer camps, right? Esports is STEM specific in a way that really not any other athletic or competitive teams are, right? The numbers say that 65 to 70% of students that are involved in esports teams are in some STEM related major. That's a powerful statistic, and that's a powerful tool that if companies are looking to connect with a certain kind of student, right, or a student who has a certain interests, you're gonna get more bang for your buck in promoting through our esports program. And so, yeah, one, local, keep it local, make it something tangible, right? Make sure that there's a way that you're giving back to those people who are supporting you, and know your value. And lastly, like when it comes to fundraising and things like that, you don't have to reinvent the wheel sometimes, right? Like if there are certain things that have worked for other schools or clubs, right? I can remember when I was a kid, like playing for our hockey team, I went around to local businesses and say, hey, would you buy this spot in our yearbook, right? Like that stuff still works. They still do that stuff because it works, right? So there's a lot of different opportunities for sponsorships and partnerships when it comes to esports in general.
Yeah, absolutely. So where do we go from here? If anybody's watching either the recording on YouTube or here today, and you already have an esports program, you might think to yourself, okay, well, most of the stuff that we've talked about today is really geared towards, getting a team off the ground and having things maybe reaffirmed with how you did things in the first place. But for existing programs, or where do you go once you have things set up? I think there's a couple of things that we really want to highlight. Number one is just the competitive opportunities in the state. And Chris, I'm really going to turn it over to you here to kind of highlight things. You are the Michigan native, but there's really three really great groups to get involved with at the high school level. And I would really love for you to kind of touch on some of the things that are happening, in the state with these groups.
Yeah, so here in Michigan right now, at the high school level, if you're looking to get involved, there's multiple options, just to be honest, right? There's MySEF, which is the Michigan High School Esports Federation. It's nonprofit, run by volunteers, run by educators, really. They do a great job, helping provide opportunities for students. And then the other large one is the MHSEL, the Michigan High School Esports League, who's kind of they function underneath the MASSP, Michigan Association for Secondary School Principals, which your school may already be involved in or may not. And so both of them are really good options. They provide opportunities in a variety of different games. MySEF is free for schools to participate in, and there is a registration cost for MHSEF. That's just one of the main differences between the two of them. So just kind of upfront know that. If you're in the Southwest Michigan area, I do also recommend looking into the Southwest Michigan Esports League. They've been a league, I think they have about 25 different teams from the Southwest Michigan area now. And so they've been putting on different events for those schools as well. So there may be also regional opportunities out there for you in Michigan to get involved, but plenty of opportunities, good programs that are doing good work, good organizations, definite options to get involved.
Yeah, and I think the cool thing when you talk about the competitive side of things is a lot of your competition is going to happen online. Just, you're going to play from your school, but multiple, actual in-person events happen in the state of Michigan throughout the year, run by these organizations. I know there was just a winter championship or a fall championship here not too long ago over in Oakland. And there's different opportunities throughout the calendar year to have your teams travel and be a part of some of these state finals or regional events. And it's a really cool way for your teams to meet other students in the state of Michigan that are also passionate about gaming and esports, and have that play on a stage in front of a live crowd opportunity that not a lot of people get to experience. So there's some really cool benefits to joining and doing the competitive side of esports at the high school level, at the college level, but it goes beyond just competitive. We've got Chris here on the webinar as the representative for Michigan State. They're doing some really cool things and planning some really cool things that go outside of just having a competitive team. So, Chris, I would love for you to kind of just touch on the plans for Michigan State and kind of some of the things that you're doing that are a little different in some of the places that, might not be the immediate thought for esports.
Yeah, so I'll just do the high level overview of Michigan State esports, where we are, what we're doing. So we're really just beginning to launch our official support for esports on campus. I was hired at the beginning of August, so still less than 6 months there at Michigan State. But when we look at esports at Michigan State, we look at it as more than just competition, right? We really have this holistic approach to esports, and that's really reflected in kind of our 4 pillars of esports, which is campus. So, opportunities for any student, regardless of their skill level or experience, to engage with esports, whether that's open play opportunities or watch parties, kind of a bring yourself and everything's provided for you type approach to esports. Club. So we have a very large esports club on campus, and us continuing to help support and advise that club, keeping it student run and student led, because that's really important for us, that is a student initiative. But the esports club can be a really powerful tool for community when it comes to esports. So making sure that we're giving them the support that they need. As far as competitive goes, this is really the kind of pillar that most of the esports programs in the country focus on, this pillar, and then it kind of stops past there. But for us, it's launching official university supported Michigan State esports teams, right? That have travel funded and they have scholarships available to them, that they have coaching provided for them, right? That's our 3rd pillar. And those teams will be launching in fall of next year. So fall of 2023. And then lastly, it's career. So for us, we look at esports as an opportunity to enhance what students are already learning in the classroom. How can I take what they're learning and give them the opportunity to grow their portfolio, or real life opportunities to apply those career skills that they're doing. Esports touches so many different careers, from social media to broadcasting to event management to journalism. Like there's so many, the list goes on and on and on, of different careers that are tied into esports. So we really want to utilize our esports program as a way that we're helping students not just prepare for, what they're doing while they're on campus, but help set them up for success after campus and after their time at Michigan State University. And so, like I said, this is kind of our vision and our approach to esports. We are building out a dedicated esports space with Gravity Gaming custom PCs, Gravity Gaming by ByteSpeed. So, if it tells you anything, if you're looking for PCs, that's where we're getting ours from. I've worked with Gravity Gaming in the past and been ecstatic about the customer service and support and quality of the machines. And so, we're planning on doing that again. We're going to put those PCs. They'll be very cool. They'll have our custom Spartan logo on the PCs. Very excited to get those in hand. But yeah, like I said, with the competitive teams, we'll have coaching and travel, scholarship opportunities for students as well. But that's just a very high level overview of kind of the things that we're doing at Michigan State Esports. When you look around the state of Michigan, right, like there are a significant number of different opportunities related to esports at the collegiate level. There's over 25 colleges in the states that have programs right now. Many of them do offer scholarships as well. My advice would be that, if you're a student or you're a teacher that's trying to advise students, is that, find the right fit for you as a student and a player. Every program is different. The priorities for every program is different. What the school itself is strong at is different. I always tell students, don't just pick the program, pick the school that you're going to, because that's going to be probably the larger part of your happiness of where you're going to college. And so make sure that you're taking the time to find the right fit. I say, I have it on here, college is about the next 40 years, not just the next 4. So, and that really speaks to making sure that you're finding the right school for you as a person, not just necessarily, the best esports program. And so, yeah, One thing I wanted to highlight is that esports programs aren't just for players, right? There's plenty of different ways to get involved with collegiate esports programs. And I encourage you to do this at the high school level as well, beyond just being a player, right? Like we have casters that are in our programs. We have people that actually are behind the camera doing the production, managing our stream for us. We have team managers that help with schedules and, getting everything set for our players so that they can compete at their highest level. So there's a lot of different ways for students to get involved in esports programs beyond just being a player, right? It could be social media, designing our graphics, making videos for us, just so many different ways to get involved.
Absolutely. That kind of leads us into the next deal is, Chris, you talked about a lot of the different career opportunities and the different areas that tie into esports. We're living proof of jobs that didn't exist 4 or 5 years ago. So I think it's important to highlight here as we kind of wrap things up, just the opportunities for your students, no matter where you're at, whether it's, the seventh grader who loves playing games and wants to, really follow esports all the way to a professional career, or maybe it's a high school senior that's ready to find a financial degree, but also wants to be involved with the esports program. There's so many different majors or different programs or different industries that are tied to esports, but maybe not just directly the players playing the games and the coaches that are working with those teams. This graphic is from a couple of years ago, but it's, I think, a cool representation of just how connected the industry is and how expansive the opportunities are. You have everything from broadcast to digital information and technology, business, admin, education, media, the list goes on and on and on. And I think it's a really cool growing category of jobs that are out there, that your students today that are in middle school and high school and in college, their opportunities for careers past graduation is expanding and growing every single day. So, pay attention to the interests of your students, even if they're not, like, I want to be one of the best 10 players in the world. If they're passionate about esports and want to be a part of something, there's definitely ways to do that at the college level, at the high school level, at the professional level, even if they're just not, necessarily like that player on the League of Legends squad. So definitely some cool things coming, and the industry is growing and growing and growing every single year. So, we've got 2 real quick pre-submitted questions that we're going to buzz through really quickly. Now would be a great time as we kind of wrap things up here. For those in attendance live, if you have any questions, to drop them in the Q&A or the chat. And while we kind of just end up here in the last 3 or 5 minutes, we just want to touch real quick on 2 questions. The best way to gain student interest and kind of make sure that you know what your students are looking for. Chris, when we were kind of prepping for the webinar, you had a really good kind of point about this, and I'd love for you to kind of expand on that right now.
Yeah, I think when you're making decisions about what your esports program should look like, the best thing you can do is collect as much information as possible before you make those decisions. And for me, before you really do anything else, send out an interest survey, right? Make an announcement over the school, PA, or, have some of your students that that are interested, put these up QR codes that students can fill out an interest survey where you're getting their name, what grade they're in, what games they like to play, and, gather as much of that information. So then you could say, hey, we have 100 students who filled out this interest survey, and these are the games that they're interested in. And then you can take that and use that as part of the conversation about what should we be building, right? I've talked to so many different schools. Like, this is one of the most common stories I hear from schools, is that the amount of interest that we had in our esports program far exceeded what our expectation of that interest was, right? I went to a school where they said, hey, we're going to put a form in the office, and if you're interested in esports, come fill out this form by the end of the week. And they had more students sign up than there were on their football team, right? Or I had a school that's like, we had a room that seats 40 students that we had our first intro to esports meeting in, and 200 students showed up to that intro to esports meeting, right? And so to me, try to collect as much of that information as you can ahead of time, so you can kind of set expectations about, what the amount of interest is, what types of games they are, and don't specifically list games. Leave it open for them to say, hey, I play League of Legends, or I play Splatoon, or find out where your students are so you can possibly meet them where they are. And I just think, an interest survey at the beginning, put them around school as much as you can. You have bulletin boards, or have teachers, say, hey, if you're interested in esports, sign this paper, whatever, right? Just try to collect as much information as you can in the beginning before you start making decisions on your esports program.
And that kind of leads into kind of like the last point here is like what information should be included in a district-wide proposal or a collegiate proposal to your cabinet. Having that student data is really, really important. But also, don't be afraid to ask, other schools in the area, other schools in the state that have done this before. There are a number of schools all across the state of Michigan that have built out esports programs and are doing really amazing things. And I think one of the things that you'll find about the community is that we all want esports to grow. We all want it to succeed. We want it to get better. And that means more schools adopting and really diving in and making the push to I hate to say it, but like almost like legitimize it like other activities that we've been doing for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So talk to your fellow districts, talk to other colleges, talk to people in your conferences or in your network that have done this before, learn from them, steal the best ideas, and apply that to what your situation will be. We talked about some other resources early on. NACAT as the National Coaches Association. It's a great group to look into for a network to also ask these questions and to find info that you can kind of put into a proposal. Talk to your vending partners and people that are, a company like ByteSpeed that has helped a lot of schools from around the country put these labs together. Great resources to be able to help share and help you plan for building out a space. So definitely, there's a lot of information out there. It might seem overwhelming, but if you, take it one step at a time, talk to those that have done this before you. I'm sure Chris would love to lend a hand to anybody that would need it in the state and be able to be a guidance for them, which is awesome. I ask for help and it will be there, for you is kind of the biggest takeaway here. And when you're putting that proposal together, have the meaning behind your esports program, have the students help lead the charge. That's a really powerful thing. And if you can show the impact that it's going to make and, justify the cost and the time and the space, I think you'll find that you can put together something really, really special. So I don't see any questions in the chat or the Q&A. So we'll just say happy holidays and thanks so much for joining us. Chris, any final thoughts while we sign off here?
No, I just encourage you, at the beginning, I had my contact information. Feel free to reach out. It's kind of a rising tide raises all ships here in Michigan, and I'm excited to help in any way that I can. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions. You want to talk about esports, I'm willing and available.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Chris, for your time, for your expertise. For everyone that joined us here live, thank you so much for joining us. It was great to see a lot of familiar names in the panelists and in the attendees. And if you're watching on YouTube, thanks so much for finding our channel. Comment your questions, subscribe so that you get updated when we post webinar recordings like this. And we'll definitely see you in the next one. And thanks again to Intel for sponsoring today. Really appreciate their support. And happy holidays, everyone. Stay safe, stay warm. It has been blizzarding in Minnesota for the last week. So be safe out there and we'll see you next time.